to. But joining me now to go through these stories, Noah Khogali, the Conservative councillor and political commentator with Young Voices UK. Noah, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. How are you?
Very well. Seeing that local elections are very much in your wheelhouse, I'd love to talk to you about this story, political story in the Times today, saying since May, local elections, Reform have won the most contests of any party since, actually taking up a third of all votes. What is behind their success, do you think?
Ultimately, I think this is Labour doing much worse, much more quickly than they would have both expected or hoped. Reform has turned into very much, they have a strong base of their own support, but also a very clear protest vote. And because Labour have been performing so poorly since coming into government, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but haven't really dealt with, quote unquote, the reform issue as well as they probably should have, you've seen these massive swings towards reform, and they've won 24 council seats of the 65 contests, in the past 2 months. That's pretty damning on the current government.
Yes, but this is also a problem for your party, isn't it? The Conservatives, who are seeing their support being eaten away by a party further to the right that is creating far more attention, headlines, policy announcements than the current Conservatives.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a challenge that the Conservatives are very, very viscerally aware of, because it's in part what led to the last election result. That doesn't wipe the slate completely clear overnight after that election, and that's part of a long-term building, I think. It's still ultimately a protest vote in the same way as it was against the Conservatives at the last election. And that's something the Conservatives are going to have to deal with moving forward.
A couple of interesting things in this piece. Tory activists have reported a drop in membership numbers, so it suggests sort of lack of appetite from people who, formerly would have been very supportive of the party. But this is interesting. Reform was highlighted a particular concern to the Labour Party and to the Conservatives because it had significantly boosted turnout in council by-elections, which is a hard thing to do. It suggests there is political motivation from people to say, my council by-election that previously I maybe wouldn't have taken any interest in, historically have quite low turnout. I am motivated because I would like to see a Reform candidate on my local council.
Absolutely. Look, in terms of memberships as well, it does fly in the face a little bit of a lot of modern political thought in terms of, party memberships declining over the long term, lack of engagement in politics. And for a politics in the long term, there is a way that this ends up as a very good thing for everybody and more engagement across the board in the substance of politics. But that's fundamentally what it needs to be. It needs to not just be a brief flash in the pan, populist movement, and needs to be something more granular and long-term engagement from everybody in our political system. Ultimately, that should be something that every party wants, and that should be a good thing.
There was quite extraordinary criticism made by the Science and Technology Secretary Peter Kyle last week of Nigel Farage, talking about Reform's opposition to the Online Safety Act. That is something that was then repeated by Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, now by Jess Phillips as well. This allegation that Nigel Farage would enable modern-day Jimmy Saviles. Why do you think, I'm looking in the Times now, writing up this piece, Patrick Maguire, why is it that the Labour Party are sticking firm to this strategy of saying Nigel Farage facilitates individuals like Jimmy Savile?
It's incredibly strange, especially given how hard they pushed back against Boris Johnson when he tried to use the Savile card on Keir Starmer, as ultimately it is. It's a horrible thing to do, especially when they're talking about the Online Safety Act, which I don't think anyone can genuinely sit down and say is a flawless piece of legislation. There are issues with it, and Labour need to, be talking honestly about trying to have that debate normally, rather than just trying to link, really high-profile paedophiles to high-profile politicians. It's horrific, to be honest. It's horrible.
Does this actually help Reform, perhaps in some regards? Because you might find the comparison so distasteful that you think this is actually quite cheap politics.
Without a doubt, 100% I think it does. Because lots of the strategies I think you've seen from Labour have been to do these broad brush attacks on Reform and their voter base, which, given it's something that is quite large at the moment, is an incredibly foolish thing to do. And I think it will come back to bite them.
Is there a problem here that actually what is being lost is scrutiny of the online safety bill? I mean, what Reform want to talk about, they believe the bill impinges on freedom of speech, and that conversation slightly got lost now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that debate does need to be had. And over the long term, I think it very much will. And you've already seen a huge rise in people using VPNs. I think there needs to be a serious conversation within Labour about whether they want to win this political fight or, as they're saying they do, protect children, etc. Because at the moment it seems to be more about winning the fight than it does about the actual substance of what they set out to do in the first place.
Let's move from challenges facing the government to potential, well, I don't know if we could call this a success. Looking inside the Times today, the headline is the NHS says some hospitals kept up 98% of services in last week's 5-day resident doctor action. Overall, they say 93% of planned operations, tests and procedures went ahead during the strike. I mean, if they can prevent the junior doctors causing the amount of chaos they did in the strike action 18 months ago, they're on to a bit of a winner, aren't they?
That would be absolutely massive. And I think, ironically, loads of public services have had quite a lot of practice now in dealing with strikes. And ultimately, this would be a very, very good thing for the NHS if they can maintain service, and a very good thing for the general public. Less so for those junior doctors, obviously.
How do you imagine this is going to play out? There's what they're calling the BMA, a bit of breathing space between this last day of action and potentially when they go on strike again. Both sides have said that the door's open to continue discussions. But for the BMA, public support is not as strong as it was the last time they went on strike 18 months ago. And if they don't manage to cause the chaos or the cancelled appointments as they did last time, they may find their negotiating position is slipping.
Absolutely. I think this could be... look, the BMA have done quite well in terms of their achieving their goals over the past couple of years with their strike action. They've caused huge amounts of disruption, generally got close to deals that they've wanted, as have lots of public services. And often it seems like a lot of them expected when Labour came in that they would kind of just buckle to their demands. But ultimately, you've seen massive change in public opinion in terms of these strikes. And I think this is kind of the end of the road for them now, where it's hard for them to continue justifying going on strike for significant pay demands if they're not achieving anything at all, but just causing potentially just 2% annoyance to things that are planned. It's a hugely important movement for the BMA, and I don't think it's going well for them.
The doctors' unions rejecting figures showing that less than a third of resident doctors joined strike action last week and that 93% of those operations and procedures went ahead. So we're now having an argument over the data and the rules as well. But we'll see how that develops. Of course, the BMA have got a mandate to strike right the way through until Christmas. So we'll see what happens over the next few months. Now, talking about the online safety bill, The Guardian on their front page, they say Channel 4 film sparks a move to ban, and then they're quoting here, barely legal porn. Barely legal is a phrase taken from Bonnie Blue, the porn star who was interviewed actually by the Saturday Times magazine last weekend. This is because on Channel 4 you can, just in a couple of clicks, there's no sort of independent age verification process, watch the documentary that she stars in, where she talks about how she had sex with over 1,000 men over the course of 12 hours. And it has raised, I think, legitimate and significant concerns about why it is so easy to access such graphic material so easily online.
Ultimately, I'd like to preface this by saying it's number one, incredibly strange and incredibly sad. Specifically on Bonnie Blue, it continually blows my mind that she's number one receiving this amount of media attention, because it's horribly sad. But I do understand it, because it is something that I don't know, it grips the soul in a certain way. It's horrible. Yes, there is a definite issue with differences in what can be created and displayed on the internet in different places. So one of the issues that there is a loophole where essentially adults role playing as children create pornography that appears close to child sexual abuse isn't allowed in, say, a cinema, but is allowed online. That is an obvious legal loophole that probably does need fixing. But the online, Safety Act isn't something that really deals with when, any 14-year-old can go and spend a minute downloading a free VPN, and none of the legislation will then protect them anyway.
Yeah, and in this case, not even a VPN, actually. I mean, Channel 4 asks you how old you are, but it doesn't check. So you could make up any age and then be able to access the documentary. The policing minister said she's going to discuss the ease with which children could access the documentary on Channel 4's website with colleagues. So we will see if that changes things. I think probably that specific documentary coming at the same time as the online safety bill maybe will raise sort of more salience on the issue. Final thing we should talk about, just to lighten the discussion a little bit. We are obviously early risers on early breakfast, but restaurants are changing the times that they're serving dinner to sort of accommodate more people who'd like to eat earlier. Gen Z's perfect time to dine, apparently, is 6 p.m, which is booming, which I think sounds very sensible.
It's far too early for me. I think I'd be hungry again by 9 and then looking for more food. 6 o'clock, far too early for me. Give me something between, 7:30 and 8:30, and I will be perfectly happy.
There is a trend, though, Noah, that you are clearly not part of. So if you book your reservation using OpenTable, I'm sure you've done that before. There's a big rise in 6 p.m. reservations, up 11% in London, 6% across the UK. So it's not just something that's happening in our big cities, because I think people maybe want to, finish work and go straight to dinner rather than have that kind of wind down time before. But can you kind of think of any other theories as to why that might be the case?
I have a very, very much other theory, especially in London, is that pubs close so early that if you want to then go out for a drink afterwards, if you have a 8 to 9 o'clock dinner slot, you're probably going to be met with a swathe of closed pubs in central London. And whilst I know there's a more wholesome argument potentially where people just, want to go home and be in bed by 9, I think it's also that people might want a pint.
Noah, thank you very much. Noah Khogali, the Conservative councillor and political commentator with Young Voices UK, going through the papers with me. I do